Hello and welcome to my next video tutorial about painting miniatures. Today is the very special episode because I'm going to present to you how to paint this Minas Tirith archer from the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game. And it's very special because it's my free tutorial that I'm recording and creating today in order to help you stay at home and paint your miniatures. So I assume that you've got more time for painting right now because you're saving lots of time on traveling and going back from your work. So it's the time when you can spend a bit more of time on painting your Minas Tirith warriors. Of course, the techniques that I'm going to present to you here are easy to apply on any kind of miniatures. It's going to be a lot of non-metallics and placement of light and shadows. So many useful things. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Flamon from Flamon Miniatures, and I'm obviously not native speaker for English language. I was never good at it and never good at math and stuff like this, so forgive me please all the mistakes that I'm making and I'm going to make. I'm trying to be as good as I can, but well, I was always mostly focused on painting and drawing. Okay, so let's start working on this miniature. So as you can see, it's already prepared with base color, and I removed all the mold lines from it. That was a little bit of work, but now he's ready and we can start working on it. Okay, so the first color that I'm going to use on him is black gray from the Vallejo. I'm using mostly Vallejo paints because, well, I simply like them a lot. So you will see a lot of them. Of course, you can use any other brand. It doesn't matter which one you use. The only thing that matters is the color. Okay. Okay, I need to change a few things. Okay, I guess this will be better now. Okay, so yeah, black gray. Now, of course, I need black paint. This is really irrelevant which brand you're going to use now. So now I'm using P3 formula, but I have been using all the black paints over the years that I could get my hands on. Well, so far I can tell that I was the most happy with Chaos Black from Games Workshop when the shape of the pots was completely different. But they are not producing it anymore, so yeah, I have to go with other stuff. Okay, so now for painting I'm going to use the paintbrush from Winsor Newton Series 7 size 2. It's important to have at least size 1 and size 2 because size 2 works much better on bigger surfaces. The work goes faster and the surface is smoother if you use it. And now about the consistency, I'm going to use something like this. It's usually described as the milk consistency. I wish I could tell you exactly how much water I add, but this is impossible because every paint has different amount of medium in it, so the level of dilution will be different on each one. So we need to simply try to have something like this and don't focus too much on the amount of water. Okay, so now I will simply paint all of the metallic parts with this mixture. Of course, because these dudes have gray clothes, I will paint also his clothes with it. So basically almost all of the miniature will be painted with this mixture. His shoes I will definitely paint in brown colors because, well, there is simply too much gray for my taste right now. I will most probably apply 2 layers of paint because it's always better to apply more layers of paint that are thin instead of applying just a few really thick ones, because they will create structure on the surface of the miniature, and that's something we always want to avoid. So yeah, this step is of course really easy. I'm not sure if I will finish the back of the miniature on the video because, well, it's the same like painting the front but more boring. And more important is to present to you techniques that you can use. So like on every miniature, the most important thing to do is to place lights and shadow in the right places. It's one really, this is what is the most important always. Doesn't matter what you're painting. Because the miniature and its real shape is created simply by the work of shadow and light. You don't even have to be very precise with your work later with blendings and stuff like this. Especially that, well, I assume that these are miniatures for gaming, not for contests. So at least what I'm trying to present to you today is like, of course, better level than just for gaming, but it always depends on how much time you want to spend on each miniature. I'm always spending way too much. That's one of the reasons why I don't play in any game. The other reason is that I have very bad luck to the dice rolls. I'm always losing. But all in all, it's okay. I like painting anyway. Okay, this one layer doesn't look bad at all. So maybe I will stick with it. Or maybe just add a little bit more in here and there. This is actually the worst part of painting because, at least for me, because there are not many precise movements. I'm just going crazy with paint over the miniature, so later I'll see mistakes that I make. But okay, let's say that this is it. But I guess I should actually do more of base colors right now. So yeah, okay. Let's go with flat brown. It's a bit reddish color of brown. But because of it, it looks really good mixed with black paint. At least I like it a lot. For painting skin, it's not perfected. It's not perfect because it's too red. Okay, for painting, you need to have a really nice tip of your brush. So do not go with something like this on small details like here. First, because I still have paint on my paintbrush, I will use it on bigger details that are not hidden in the helmet. Yeah, places like this. Places like this you can leave unpainted, like this edge of his glove, because if you leave it black or later paint it with black, it will simply create bigger contrast between his armor on his arm and the glove, and it will simply be more visible. When we're painting small miniatures, we of course want the details to be visible, and in order to do that, we need to create strong contrast. It's been a really long time since I sit down and try to paint a miniature from the beginning to the end at once, because I'm always trying to create something, more artistic, and it takes time of work and thinking about details. So this is really interesting thing for me right now. I hope I will do well. Okay, now I cleaned my brush. And now, as you can see, I have much better tip, so I can finally work on his face. Okay. Now it's time for the straps. There are many details that are not painted perfectly right now. I will simply fix them later. Many of them are simply not very visible because all of this is one big black mess so far. So yeah, just don't focus on them. They will appear sooner or later. Okay. So now I can see a piece of metal here and there that appeared after I was removing mold lines. Horrible thing, I hate it. Okay, so now let's take pure black gray, and it's time to paint the feathers in there of the arrows. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of this part and I don't have to Google it now. Okay, so because they are supposed to be white, we need to create much lower contrast than on the other details here because we don't want them to look metallic. So that's why just paint them all with black gray. I will need to make them brighter anyway later, so but this is beginning. Okay, so this is the first step in painting this dude. Now is a very important part of the painting. I'm going to use neutral gray for it. And what is so important is that now it's the moment where you decide where the light is coming from and how it illuminates the miniature. Because you need to make this decision. It's much easier when you're painting something that is two-dimensional, but the miniatures are 3D, so it will look... No, many people are saying that it look weird when you move the miniature painted in NMM, because you've got one place where you've got reflections and shadows on the other hand, but well, I cannot agree with them. It looks just interesting, like if you would freeze space and time and you're just looking on a dude from all the possible directions. So yeah, going back to the topic, we need to decide where the light is coming from. I'm almost always painting like it's coming from, oh, let's present it like this, on this angle, like from the above, but also a little on the angle. But in that case, when I'm painting mostly on a contest level, let's call it this way. So I first decide from which perspective I'm going to present it on the photos. So from which on which angle he looks the best. So I think that I guess that would be it. And now you freeze for a moment. You can make a photo now and just put it on your smartphone and then see this as the reference photo. Or you can simply go with the flow and paint it like you see that the light is reflecting from the lamps. So yeah, I'm just following the real reflections because it's like the best reference you can have. But of course now I'm going to paint it like this, but I have it right now in my hand in a pretty uncomfortable position for me. So now I will paint it like I see the reflections, but you won't see them. But yep, I will try to reproduce this. Okay, so from my perspective, right now reflections are most visible on front of his helmet. And I think I will make it a bit bigger. Now the light reflects very well in here. Now is the reflection in here. When you're painting NMM, it's really important to create contrastful places. Like in here, I need to have contrast here, but I see that the light reflects here as well. I will work on that later. Okay, now these parts are much easier to follow. Some parts I can paint a bit differently than in reality. Like these reflections are the reference that I can use, but I don't have to. You need to treat them as something that is here to help you, not something that you have to follow one-to-one. So some reflections can be bigger. That will look better. Also, you need to remember that the reflections that you can see now are reflections on the paint, not on the real metal. So you need to remember that the real metal will reflect the light much stronger than this. So you simply need to make some of these reflections stronger than they are now. Now, very problematic part, which is the tree on his armor. Okay, now let's try a bit of dry brush, but in that case I'm just trying to be very precise and use the side of my brush, as you can see. Remember that your brush is not only the tip, but also its sides. And the side can be very, very useful. There are always places on the miniature, on the armor, that are maybe not reflecting the light, like on our reference photo, but would simply look like something. And one of these things is like this. The armor is curved, so the light would work more or less like this. Like I said before, this what I presented to you is here to help you. You don't have to follow it one-to-one. Okay, but very interesting thing that you probably never do is that this side of the armor right now is reflecting the light like with its whole surface. So we will have to paint it like this. But first the knee. And when you paint a side of a knee like this, you need to remember to keep another reflection on its side in the shaded area. And this reflection would be small, but it's important to place it there, in there. So let's go to this bigger part. Of course, for that I need to change the way how I hold the miniature, because one of the most important things in painting miniatures on good level is having comfortable grip. Right now, as you can see, this dude is pinned to a cork, and there can be a situation like this where this cork would destabilize its position. Then you simply take it off, because it's another weight that you have to keep in your hand. Remember to simply keep things comfortable for you. See, this starts to work now. Okay, and the light here works in much weaker way. Very illuminates this part, so we will make simple reflection here, and a reflection here, because once again this part of the armor is facing the source of light. Okay, now this part of the armor, as you can see, is illuminated in very strongly. Of course, do not forget about his cloths. Okay, now because he's in this position, we will paint only edges of this armor. Okay. Okay, this once again this knee armor is actually in the shadow, but we need to make it visible. So I will paint it in much brighter way than it would look right now. Okay, let's make this kind of reflection. We will see what will happen with it later. And this is actually shaded part of the miniature. But let's make the reflection anyway. It's paint, so everything I paint now I can repaint later, so do not worry. I can always change things. Okay, here we need big reflection. Of course, like I said, this part of the miniature is not illuminated, but like I said, it's problematic with painting miniatures because we can see them from all edges and we want them to look good. Okay, when you're painting this part of the armor, it's actually easy because you need to make strong line that ends all of a sudden in the half of it, like this. This will really work really well soon. Okay, now this side. I assume that his back, I will look from this position. So let's paint. You need to follow the shape of the helmet, so it will need to be painted like this. Of course, I could make really interesting things on the helmet, create some crazy reflections, but like I said, I want to show you how to paint him nice, not how to paint him on the contest level. Keep this in mind, please. I will I might present to you how to paint on higher level on my next free tutorial that is going to be about painting Minas Tirith captain. But on this video I just want to show you how to paint this dude in a nice way. Now once again, in order to create contrast, we need to paint this reflection here. We can also create a reflection in here in order to keep this pattern of creating strong contrast. And in order to create contrast, you need to go in this way, like dark, bright, dark, bright. And once again, a common mistake on painting Minas Tirith warriors is that you need to paint reflection just on the top of this armor, on the back. Because you need to create contrast reflections. If you paint this whole part, there won't be space for contrast, and without that, then there won't be this feeling of metallic reflection on it. On the helmet, I will have to paint more reflections. Many of them won't make any sense, but they will look good. And that's what we need to follow when we are painting. Many times we have to paint things that don't make any sense, but simply look good. Okay, in case if that would take too much time, I will focus now on painting the front of the miniature instead of the back, because, well, I don't know how much time can it take me. Now I can finally take a smaller brush size 1 and paint some details. Okay, so when you're painting the chainmail, you need to paint simply reflections on it instead of covering the whole space with paint, because it's made of small circles that are reflecting the light. So just paint a few reflections on them and it will look much better than if you would paint the whole surface. Okay, let's try to... Okay, it's time for bigger close-up. Yep, at this point you need to also paint reflections between the branches. As you can see, he starts to look like something. Okay. You have to paint also reflections on the helmet on the places where it's not illuminated, because as metallic object it will reflect a lot of things around it, not only direct light, but also the light that is being reflected by other objects. So that's why we need to, for example, paint reflections in the shaded area. Okay, same thing here, of course. Okay, so now it's time to finally use pure black gray, because now we need to have another reflections. Because the reflection doesn't end in place where is the direct light, you need to have another reflection in shaded areas, like I mentioned, but they need to be weaker. So first let's mark them with black-gray. And it's important to paint this reflection under this reflection in here. And now we will make spaces between. Oh no, let's go to blending colors right now. So now I need to dilute this paint. I'm going to blend the reflections. In order to do that, I am painting with my technique that you can try out with painting with pencil or something like this. The thing is that now I have paint on my brush, and when I push it like this, it leaves a lot of paint, but when I try to touch it less and less, it leaves smaller and smaller mark. So that's exactly what I'm doing. What I'm going to do now with the one difference that I'm going to make delicate movements from the beginning. In this way I leave very small amount of paint and I can create transition between one color to another. Like I mentioned before, I'm not painting right now on my best level because it takes a lot of time. I'm simply presenting you the techniques right now. Of course, you can, for example, the best effects you can have if you mix colors in the way that you could have midtones. So if you would mix black gray with neutral gray and use this mixture for now, you would have better, smoother transition. But right now I'm trying to paint it faster. And I will be going there will be a lot of going back and forth in this step. Like you can see, now I'm using the darkest color that I created in order to make this transition a little smoother. Sometimes you can simply mix the paint that you already have on your paintbrush with darker tone in order to create mixture just on the tip of your brush. That's what I just did right now. Okay, it's time to blend his robe a little, his clothes. Okay, you can paint a little bit, some tiny space in here with this black gray in order to create the reflection. Okay, now I will mix 50-50 neutral gray with black gray in order to create some smoother transitions. As you can see, he starts to look like something that makes sense. Now we need to make this reflection stronger. But very gently. Because we have here a really big space that would reflect a lot of light. So it has to be much brighter. Although also, of course, neutral gray is not the brightest color that I'm going to use on this armor. You can make this area brighter as well, because like I said, the most important for NMM is creating contrasts. See, now it makes more sense. And because of that, I need to create a small reflection in here as well. So first I will use a little bit of black gray. Now this mix of neutral gray and black gray. Now the helmet. Or let's first paint this part. Okay, the helmet can be more problematic. Let's mix more of these paints. Okay. Now I'm going to basically do the same thing. Now let's mark a few edges with this paint. Okay, so this step is basically done. As you can see, we can finally see some shapes on the miniature. It starts to work. Now it's time for brighter color, for brighter reflections. And this color is going to be blue-gray pale. Okay, and now we are going to simply highlight highlights right now with it. Very good thing about my technique is that when you're painting like this, by painting tiny bright scratches with bright color over darker one, it will simply look like if you've been painting scratches on the surface of metal. So it will simply look very good. That's why you can also be very chaotic right now and imagine that you're simply painting scratches. You see how this starts to look metallic? I most definitely can see that. So yeah, this stage is much easier than the previous ones because we already have created reflections, and now I'm simply highlighting them a little bit. And now the brightest reflection on this part of the armor has to be in here. Now, of course, I need to make the highlight on the helmet the brightest part of the armor, except for the part of the chest armor. And this is actually too bright, so I need to fix this by mixing blue-gray pale with neutral gray. Yeah, it's too bright. So first let's paint it with neutral gray. Okay, now this mix of blue-gray and neutral gray for these highlights, because like I said, we need to have highlights everywhere, but some of them will be darker, some of them will be brighter. Now this mixture, because this reflection needs to be brighter than it is now, but darker than this reflection on front. Now once again, this mixture. Okay, now I think that because I have this part so dark, it would be good to highlight this side of the leg. So first black gray. pure neutral gray. Okay, much better. Okay, so like I said before, you need to remember to keep creating contrast. Okay, now a bit of neutral gray in order to make this highlight brighter, because as you can see, the light is reflecting on this side, so it would illuminate this side as well. Oh, not the right paint. Now let's mark the edges. Let's make them more visible. Now let's highlight the chainmail. Remember to don't paint the whole elements, just the reflections on them. Now it looks pretty metallic to me. But there's one more step in highlights to make. Okay, so let's continue. In the meantime, I made some black lining and I made a few edges more visible. But now it's time to go back for painting. Okay, and I decided that I need to make this side a bit brighter. So first I highlighted it, made a reflection with black gray, because as you can see he has arrows here, and these arrows are going to have white feather, so the white feather would most definitely reflect on the armor. And because of that I need to have here a bit stronger reflection. And while we are on it, I think it's time to paint them, because they are a bit problematic in here. So for that, I will take white paint. Okay. And I will mix it with a small amount of neutral gray in order to, of course, make it a bit darker, because I don't want the feathers to be white, because that would be simply too bright object on the miniature. Okay, something like this will work. And now I will paint them. As you can see, here is the shape of the feathers, but you don't have to follow it exactly. When you're just painting these stripes, you're creating the feeling, not the structure, and that's all we need. This detail here, this feather now, is hidden behind other details, so it's much harder to reach it. Okay, of course we need to paint the top part as well. Okay, now let's take a bit of black gray, and I want to make this leg armor brighter, because it simply looks weird when it's so dark, because it wouldn't be this dark because there is not much to cast shadow on it. So I simply need to highlight it a little. Of course the reflection stays here, but this part needs to be a bit brighter as well. Let's paint another reflection somewhere in here. Okay, but this time much brighter with neutral gray. Okay. Now let's mix it with a little of black gray. Like I said, you can mix colors directly on your paintbrush. like what I just did. I didn't create a new mixture, I just added a bit of black gray to this what I already had on my brush. It will eventually mix with the paint on the brush, so, and you can use it this way. And when you're watching this video, I can see that it's longer than I planned. And if you want to know where to make shortcuts to simply paint faster, the shortcut is simply to don't spend so much time on blending colors and layers together. This takes most of the time. So you can simply make it quicker, make it less smooth. I'm making this smooth because that's just how I feel. Okay, so now a bit of black gray, and I want this shadow to be brighter than it is right now. It also looks unnatural to me right now. You need to have good tip for all the work, and it's really hard to have good tip because it's hard to get a really good brush these days. I have really good tip in like one for like 20% of my brushes. Most of my buys of this that I buy are not as good as I would like them to be. Okay, the contrast is much smaller now. What is maybe less impressive, but most realistic for sure, more realistic for sure. You don't have to follow this, you can simply make here stronger contrast, it's up to you, like always. After all, it's your creation. Okay, and here I have Azure Gray from Andrea Color. Very nice. It used to, Games Workshop used to make a paint that was called Space Wolves Gray. That's the same color, exactly the same color. I guess they're not producing it anymore. Okay, so now I will simply highlight a few final reflections. If you can see my hands shaking, that's because they do. And if you wonder if I'm always painting like this, then no, recording videos is very stressful for me, and my sugar is going really low when I'm painting, and it's really hard sometimes to even hold the brush. Now you need to be careful with this color because these are the final reflections. You want them to appear very sudden on surfaces. Only then it will look like metal. So yeah, now for a moment I won't have anything to say because I have very precise work to do. When you're painting this chest armor, it's important to try to keep the biggest reflection in the middle of it. This will look more natural. Look how metallic the helmet looks like now. It is completely different after these highlights. But you need to be very careful with the last highlights because they determine where the light goes, reflects the most on the armor, so you cannot use it everywhere, just in a few tactical places. If I would have to paint a whole army for playing, that would take a lot of time. Most. Or I would simply resign from playing. I just cannot paint faster. I have to paint everything, every detail as good as I can. Well, it's not exactly 100% of my skill, to be honest, but it looks decent for me. But even decent takes time. Okay, one more thing that I want to change, because I actually forgot about it. Is that I need to have, there's a lot of moving, I know, reflection in here. So as you can see, I took black gray. And I need to paint a highlight here. Okay. Now neutral gray and the same thing. Okay. I think it looks much better now. Now a few dots of light in here. Okay, much better. Now, of course, the biggest area on the miniature. So these parts, they need to be painted almost fully with this paint. Almost entirely. In reality, they would probably reflect the light with their full surface. So they would be simply big, wide, reflecting surface. That would be white, but because we are painting, we need to make a few things simply different. So I won't paint them fully. I will make a small contrast on the edges, because this will simply look better. Less realistic, but better. Sometimes instead of using this color, I prefer to simply mix neutral gray with white because this paint acts sometimes really weird. Like right now, it doesn't work in the way how I would like it to work. It leaves a lot of, as you can see, the surface is not smooth. That's something I really hate. I will fix this in a moment. I think this kind of reflection will work nicely here. Let's mix it with blue-gray paint. Okay, much better. I know this video tutorial is supposed to be short, but as you can see, I guess I'm not capable of doing such thing. For some reason, everything I paint, I cannot paint things faster. I always have some quality that I want to achieve, and it takes time. But there are plenty of other painters that paint quickly, so there's no need to add another one to this list. I like to have each detail painted really nicely. So like I said, you can save plenty of time on simply not making these transitions super smooth like I do. The most important thing is to simply place the light and shadow in the right places. And then you can leave it in the condition that you feel comfortable with. Okay, that would be it. Except maybe for, I don't know, let's take neutral gray and a bit of white. And let's make the cloth that is, I guess, skirt a bit brighter. Okay, let me now please make a few details smoother, because that's what I do, and I will also make black lining, and that will be it. So see you in a moment. Okay, so in the meantime I highlighted the edges of the armor and I blacklined a few details in order to make them more visible, and this is how it looks like now. Okay, so that was the tutorial about painting the armor of Minas Tirith warrior, full non-metallics. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I want to say a big thank you to all my Patreons. This couldn't happen without you. And okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I will soon make a new one about painting the rest of the details on this miniature. In the meantime, stay safe and see you next time. Bye.